All right, guys, welcome back to Marlins 9. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. Follow me on Twitter at Jeremiah Geiger2. And joining the show, returning to the show, is the host of Locked on Marlins, Peter Pratt, the GOAT from over there in England. Peter, thanks for joining. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Jeremiah. Great to be back on and looking forward to this. And congrats for you and your show continuing to grow, mate. So I've been loving the recent episodes. Smoking Joe's been on fire. Glenn Geffner, great to see, mate. So yeah, I'm pumped to be on. It's great to be the guest rather than the host. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Well, I appreciate it. First episode you've been on since spring training. I believe we did one right at the start of spring training where the direction of this team was a little bit different. It would be fair to say. And now we look at the Marlins 23-49. It's the dog days of summer, and there's really not much positives going on, Peter. In fact, a lot of negatives. But right now, if you can give me a few words just to kind of describe your feeling at this stage in the season.
Man, the dark days of summer, I think they appeared on what was it, the 3rd of May or whenever it was. It is the earliest white flag from a team I think there's ever been. And I remember I put a tweet out there because I could kind of see the way things were going. There wasn't a ton of investment. You could sense that maybe this wasn't going to be a similar year to 23. And I put a tweet out just saying, listen, all I want is for them to be relatively competitive-ish for long enough to give us that feeling, up until the deadline. Just hover. That's all I'm looking for the Marlins to do is just hover. And for it to be rebuild starts month 1, it's tough, right? Particularly when you look across the NL right now and everyone is still in it other than the Marlins, I think, and the Rockies. Other than that, everyone is within 2-3 games of the wild card. The standard is low. Everyone's chipping away at each other. You just look at it and think, man, if the Marlins were hovering, they'd be buyers right now. That's the funny thing. But, it hasn't been the year it was in 23. A lot went right in 23. A lot kind of started wrong in 24. But, Peter Bendix really pulled the plug, within a month. And for me, that ripples across the organization, the guys that are on the big league roster. That ripples across them, in my opinion. It impacts them. And really, at that point, the signal was we're not going to be competitive at this point. And for sportsmen, for players, for fans, for all of us, we thrive for competitive sports. What is sports without competition? And frankly, the Marlins and the signal from the front office is that they aren't going to be competitive this year. And when you've still got 135 games to go, that's a really tough message to send. And so this isn't surprising. The situation we're in now is not a surprising situation with the record, the way things are going. I feel like the general trend is downwards, particularly with the offensive guys. The only real bright light for me, and it's interesting that off the back of Arias being moved, there's been, for me, Jazz stepping up. It's the only real one I would say that's truly stepped up, the change of role back to the leadoff. And, we're seeing Jazz as an everyday above average player at this point, which, beyond him, there's not many others we can say that about, which is discouraging, but the reality at this point.
It was over before it even started, Peter, this season.
It was.
I believe opening day, you have the enjoyment of opening day and the excitement, a new season. And I remember it was an extra inning game to the Pirates and you lose it. And then you lose the next day and the next, and suddenly you're 0-9 and you're sitting there like, what is going on here? And it only got worse. And now it's not even July, Peter, not even July. And 6-game losing streak you have, and it's only going to get more difficult. You got the Mariners, the Royals, the Phillies coming up. So that's going to be fun. But you mentioned Jazz, and Jazz is a everyday player, above average everyday player, but also staying healthy, which has been great to see. I think that is the one positive, and I guess the one thing that the naysayers kind of picked on when critiquing Jazz and his game was his ability to stay healthy. Well, now he is finally healthy, and in the lineup every single day, but it's all for naught. And now there's a crossroads with the direction of the team where we don't even know if he's going to be on the team next year, let alone to finish out the season. So that's a difficult, kind of thing to process when you look at Arias being gone, Jazz possibly being gone. Apart from the diehards, I think most casual fans, it's safe to say, have checked out.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I put a poll out on Twitter. I wanted to just like understand, where are people at, and how often are you consuming Marlins games live now at this point? And I'm going to call it out. Like I've watched less live or in full than I did last year, because frankly, it's
I'm the
not worth
same
my
way.
time. It's not worth my time. If you pile up a week's worth of games, 6 games a week, 3 hours in total, 18 hours worth of content that is really not that worthwhile. And you're just not getting it back. And so I'm consuming things in different ways. I think others are. And there's other things that are there to distract you, right? Obviously, the Panthers are on an immense run, and big game this evening for those guys. So we wish them the best. I'm not a hockey fan. I used to be, but I just can't get back into it. I find it hard to watch on TV. By the way, hockey. It's a tricky viewing experience.
A little bit.
It's too hard to see the puck. Exactly. Like how do they change that viewing experience? But anyway, to your point, like I do think people have checked out, which is natural, because going back to the point I made earlier, uncompetitive sport is frankly pointless. And no one invests their time into sport where it's uncompetitive. And really, in the US and the way the sports leagues work, there's only an incentive to be bad linked to the draft. In the UK or a lot of European sports, there's an incentive not to be bad. And it goes down to it goes down right to the end. And you are scrapping, fighting to survive. And that is a different experience too, but it's still an experience where you're trying to avoid relegation. You don't want to get down from the Premier League down to the Championship. And that fight is on, and that fight is on all year. You don't have that in US sports. And frankly, it's something that could be looked at in the future, but man, the way, the setup is completely different in the States. So I don't ever see that happening. But that's the problem, right? The Marlins wave the white flag 2nd of May and then say to the fans, keep watching us for the next 5 months, although we're not going to be competitive.
And not only that, it's the complete complacency of the fan base. We have a divided fan base right now, because half of these fans are okay with the losing. In fact, they encourage it. I've seen multiple people on Twitter say, oh, as long as we get the number 1 pick in back-to-back years, which that's not how that works anymore. For everybody listening, the MLB draft is not structured the same in previous years. There is a lottery, and there's a chance the Marlins could end up with the 1st pick or the 6th pick. It really is a difference maker. And number 2, games aren't played on paper. And that's the thing people fail to understand, is that the analytical approach, and I'm very pro, I guess I'm very anti-analytics in the sense of you shouldn't put all your balls in that court and just leave it out there for the analytic department to handle. And I was going through Twitter and I was replying to people, and they're just okay with it. They quote this stat, or they quote, one obscure metric, and they think, oh, that justifies why Luis Arias was traded. And they don't seem to understand the importance of hitting and what the art of hitting truly is, and the fit that he wanted to be here in Miami and could have been extended. Yep. And it doesn't matter to them. And it doesn't matter to anybody. It's just a numbers game. And I think that is the most frustrating part of this season for me, Peter, is seeing people delve away from the game of baseball and start burying their heads in spreadsheets and, these advanced metrics without taking the human element of the game firsthand.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. I'm definitely not an analytics dude. I watch the games and I buy with my eyes, and I've talked about it on my show loads of times. That's how I judge players, and I think Arias is like a really good example of that. Where if you watch Arias, and we're fortunate enough to have watched Arias all last season and the start of this year, so Marlins fans have a really good view on what Arias truly is beyond the spreadsheet, right? Beyond the
Yep.
way that people just look it up and go, hey, well, WRC plus of this and, and whatever. And we've been able to watch Arias and we know how valuable that dude is, how elite he is. He is like no other. Sandy
None.
Alcantara is like no other as well in his own way. Luis Arias is like no other in his own way. But for whatever reason, there's a sense of devaluing him. But without Luis Arias, there was no playoff run last year. No doubt about it. He was absolutely, I mean, in the pre-deadline, the Marlins offense was Jorge Soler in the leadoff spot, if you remember. Do you remember Soler leading off?
Yeah.
Soler leading off and Arias hitting in the 2-hole. That was the offense. Nothing else happened. But somehow the Marlins were like, I don't know, 15, 18 games over 500 with basically a two-man offense, which was Soler and Arias. So, I know that it doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. His value isn't really demonstrated on Savant, and he doesn't compare well to other players. But Arias, the Marlins have had an issue finding hitters for years. They nailed one with Arias. In terms of pure hitter, he is right up there. And this, to me, this is why I'm upset as a fan, because I'm a fan. And I'm not a pro rebuild guy either. I'm not a pro analytics, and I'm not pro rebuild. The team, the core looked in decent shape heading into this year. Soler leaves, Sandy's injured. Okay. How do you supplement that? How do you bring in some talent to give you a chance to stay in the mix, to hover? How do you do that? And the decisions made, we're not actually even trying to hover, which is a missed opportunity here. So, watch the games. I think a lot of people probably aren't watching the games, and a lot of people don't watch Marlins games. Hence why they've never really seen Luis Arias, I think, as an example. They've never really seen Jazz this year. Like, it's easy to look back and you think you know what Jazz Chisholm is. But Jazz Chisholm Jr. in 2024 is not the Jazz Chisholm Jr. of 2023 or even beyond. It's a completely different profile, completely different player. And since Arias has gone, he's got even better, to be honest with you. So I'm with you. I'm definitely not a pro rebuild guy, but there has to be a degree of acceptance for us now, right, Jeremiah? Where this is the path that's been chosen, rightly or wrongly. We can't vote for this path. It's Bruce Sherman's path that he has hired Peter Bendix, and we know what path that is. And what that means is 24 is a bust, 25 is a bust. And when we say a bust, it's like top, you're in the lottery, bust. 26 is where I started to get my head. I was thinking, okay, 20, like, what does 26 look like? Is that a bust? Could it be and really you start to think, okay, you look ahead to 26, you've probably got a rotation there from these, particularly Noble Meyer, Thomas White that are coming through, Max Meyer that's around, obviously Yuri Perez. Don't know about Sandy, but there's a rotation there that could be nice. That was always the problem back in the day, right? But you then look in the offensive side, 2026, I mean, in the farm system anyway, is there anything in the farm system offensively that you could kind of hang your hat on? No, not one player, I don't think. And I know people go, hey, Dylan Head, he's a lottery, frankly.
Yeah.
So the question now is, with Jazz Luzardo, Trevor Rogers, Braxton Garrett, Eddie Cabrera, Tanner Scott, Declan Cronin, all of these, can you turn those guys that are on the roster, Bell, Tim Anderson, Sixto, how can you turn all of those guys effectively into an above average offense for 2026? That's the question at this point. That is the season right now. For Peter Bendix, that is his season. Turn those dudes, which will not be around in 26 or will be at the back end of arbitration, so they'll be moved, turn them into an above average offense somehow. That's the brief now, and that's what we're going to see. And it's going to be, for me, super intriguing. The thing is, though, what he's profiling, though, seems to be younger dudes. So is 26 even in play? Are we talking 27? Are we talking 28? Like Dylan Head, when he is getting to a point where he can be a contributor, an everyday contributor. What are we talking? 2027 or 2028? Like,
at the minimum.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
this is the timeline we're working towards here. Like, this is maybe 5 years of pain.
It's hard to accept. It's hard to accept,
it's
but
tough.
There's no other really option as a fan, as a podcaster, as someone who enjoys the team, than to understand what direction this team is going. And that is
Mm,
they're going to try their best to be the Tampa Bay Rays. For better or for worse, I may disagree with it as much as I can, and I will continue to voice my disagreement.
mm,
But at the end of the day, it is what it is. But Dylan Head, you mentioned lottery ticket. That's the word I describe. And
yeah.
it's such a flawed approach because you had Jesus Luzardo now, who I don't know about last start, but he was throwing 91, 92 miles an hour when he's usually throwing 96, 97. Like, that
Yeah.
worries me. Like, he's
Yeah.
your biggest trade asset apart from Jazz. And
No
you
doubt.
know the Marlins are going to hold on to Jazz for as long as they can until they possibly, can't give an excuse to not trade him. They're going to hold him until they find a perfect deal, and which is
Mm,
why I think it's going to be in the offseason. But I could see him getting traded at the deadline. But Luzardo now,
yep.
um, can you move him? Is there a market for him now that Garrett Crochet is on the table, and now the other lefty on the market, Jesus Luzardo, is suddenly throwing literally 89-mile-an-hour fastballs.
Oh
Like,
man.
that worries me, and that should
Yep.
worry Peter Bendix and company. But 2026, 2027, I think you're going to see signs of life in 26 just based on the rotation. Noble
Yep.
Meyer, Thomas White, they excite me. Like,
Me
they
too.
are legit studs. I
Yeah.
watched their highlights, and I never really was into minor league baseball in the sense of watching the games or,
Yep.
tracking prospects every time they go out. But
Mm,
Thomas White, Noble Meyer, every time those guys pitch now, I'm paying attention. I'm looking at the lines. I'm looking at the highlights. They're legit. But you
agreed.
said, look at the rest of the system. There's nobody there. There's
No.
nobody there. I did a
The reason though,
breakdown.
you whiff on it
Go
though.
ahead.
This the sorry, Jeremiah. And the reason the reason we're in this situation, which is why I think really Bruce Sherman made this change,
Hmm.
is you whiff on Jacob Berry badly,
Oh, badly.
and you whiff on Khalil Watson. Back to back years, bang bang, two major whiffs. That's why you're in this position. This type of organization, this type of market cannot you just cannot whiff on those, first round picks, second round picks. The Marlins have been able to identify pitching talent throughout DJ Svilik's time, to be fair. I think this is the funny thing is like a lot of people point the finger towards DJ, rightly so. But from a pitching perspective, he could nail it. He was probably, more often in the positive aspect than the negative. But man, oh man, from an offensive standpoint, it has just been a complete disaster. And that's why this organization is in this position where other clubs, not only are the Marlins not really invested on the field, but their other clubs are nailing their first, second round, third round, fourth round picks, offensive guys, developing them. And they keep surging up, right? And you just look around the Orioles and go, man, they nailed all of these draft picks. No wonder they're just layered of talent now. That's the core for the fish. That's been the core problem when you deeply analyze like what went wrong. Just the drafting of those guys. Like you can't whiff on a top 5 pick or whatever it was, 6 or whatever for Jacob Berry so badly. Where effectively, to me, I don't think Jacob Berry ever plays a Major League Baseball game ever for anyone.
I agree.
I don't think I just don't think it's there, which is crazy. But as soon as the pick was made, I mean, I remember watching it was probably the Fish Stripes, probably back then, the Fish on First live stream as they're recording that. All I can remember is just Isaac Azout's face, just of horror that Jacob Berry had been selected. And I mean, I'm not a prospect guy, but as soon as the Marlins made that pick, there was just a general consensus of like, oh my God, like, what have they done? This dude isn't even a first round talent, maybe even second round talent. And there lies the problem, right? So the baseline is so low. I'm very intrigued to see what profile and how this draft goes this year and how they progress. But again, we're talking multiple years in the future when we start to like see the fruits of this labor. So man, oh man, it's a tough situation for the fans. And it's one of them, you just got to stick with it. For you, Jeremiah, when you're like watching these games now in 2024, like I know you've mentioned you started watching some minor league stuff, so maybe that's kind of part of it. But like, what's your viewing experience now? How are you watching these games? What are you looking for in these games when you're watching a Marlins game now for the rest of the way?
Well, to be honest, Peter, from really the time I realized the season wasn't going anywhere, and I realized, hey, in order to move forward, this team is going to start trading guys. And here comes a rebuild. Like the writing was on the wall, and then boom, they traded Arias. It really became a matter of watching individual performances. And that really is what it is. That's what it comes down to. Like, I'll be honest, if the Marlins, they're playing tonight against the Cardinals, if they lose, 2-1, but Rodri Munoz goes 7 scoreless with 10
Let's
Ks,
go.
I'm gonna be pumped, you know?
Me too.
And
Me
that's
too.
that's a sad existence for a fan, but that's
I
the
know.
reality. Like the
The
wins and
result doesn't
losses
matter, does
just
it?
they don't matter to me. They really
Yep.
don't. Like I
Yep.
watched the game last night and it was a really good game.
Yeah, it was.
And that was a good game to watch just for the pleasure of watching baseball.
Mm.
But did it matter? Did it really matter? No, it didn't. But I love watching the development of guys like Ryan Weathers, who,
Mm.
former first round pick in San Diego, gets cast to the wayside. No one believes in him, comes to Miami. And for a while there, before he got hurt, he would have been my all-star. He really would have
Yeah,
been.
no doubt.
Um,
No doubt.
and and now you got development. You got within the hitters. There's not a ton of development to see. I think we all know Jazz is very good. I think he's a star. I think he could transcend into an absolute, face of the game overall if he was in a bigger market like LA or New York. But
Yeah.
other than that, who do we really have to watch develop? We know what Brian De La Cruz is. He's a solid
Yeah.
bat. We
Yeah.
know Jake Berger, and he's good, but I mean the rest of the guys like Emmanuel Rivera, Vidal
Come on.
Brujan, like it's tough, you know. So I watch for the individual guys, especially on the pitching staff, because
Yeah.
mentioning Rodri Munoz, I think the Marlins might have found somebody. His stuff is good. Is if he
Yeah, it
if he
is.
can cut down the home runs, he's going to be a weapon.
I completely agree on Rodri. Like, obviously, he was promoted earlier in the season, came up through whatever he threw, and I was like, man, Rodri's got game. Like
Yeah.
the stuff, like truly played, and I was like, okay, there's something here. I feel like there was maybe what was it, a 3-start maybe stint, and then he was, he was put down to AAA. So, but he's back up, and to your point, like Rodri, definitely there is something there, and the viewing experience becomes, I'm with you, like it's on the pitching side. You kind of your eyeballs are on, like, what are we going to get from Rodri Munoz? Like I'm kind of like closely watching like that Sean Anderson start. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
what's in the tank of Sean Anderson? I mean, firstly, the hairstyle, absolutely on fire. So I'm all in on Sean Anderson. I'm, a big fan of like loose haircuts. So Sean Anderson has my vote. Ryan Weathers had my vote on that point as well. Maybe that's what it is. I'm attracted to like, non
Flow.
the flow. Yeah, I want the flow. That's what I'm looking for from my pitches. But Rodri, there is something there. And I guess this is the thing for the Fish, and generally, this is their MO, right? They'll bring in guys, they'll find ways to improve them in some sort of way. Like Mel Stottlemyre has proven that. I've never seen a pitcher regress, frankly, other than Johnny
Mhm.
Cueto in all the time I've watched the Marlins. I don't think I have. Maybe actually David Robertson, but which probably shouldn't talk about him either. But you're looking at these and thinking, could Rodri Munoz, could he be something for the future? I don't know, but he's certainly going to be for 25 because he's going to be given an opportunity. And there's guys that are going to be moved. We know
No doubt.
Luzardo, they're actively looking to move. We know they're actively looking to move Eddie Cabrera. And frankly, Rodri Munoz, now at this point, who do I trust more on a single start for my life? If it was Rodri Munoz or Eddie Cabrera, I think I'd
Mm.
go with Rodri Munoz, to be honest with you. Like, that's the lack of distrust in Eddie Cabrera more than the lack of trust in Munoz, to be honest. But I think Eddie Cabrera's time with the Marlins will be done by the end of this season. I think Sixto will be the same, and I think they'll look to move Luzardo. And so this rotation, there's going to be spots available. Munoz could be one of those guys next year.
Eddie Cabrera is somebody that I wanted to talk about for a second, along with Trevor
Mm.
Rogers, because we mentioned the pitching depth, And this is where it gets a little tricky. The Marlins have so many guys that in you look at the injuries with Sandy and Yuri, they're a
Mhm.
staple. They'll be back until Sandy
Yeah.
gets traded
Yeah.
next year, I'm sure. But Edward Cabrera, his stuff is so good, but he hasn't figured it out, and I don't think he will. I think the Marlins are done with him. I think the Marlins are done with Sixto, and with Trevor Rogers, like, okay, I think he pitched 7 innings, 2
Yeah.
runs against Washington. It's like, I don't know. Like, does he have a place in the rotation next year? Would a change of scenery how would it look for him? Like, these guys, what you can't let happen, and this is what the Marlins have to realize, is that Edward Cabrera, I don't know if he's out of options or not. I can't remember off the top of
Yeah,
my
he is
head.
now.
He is.
Yeah.
So you can't let him go for nothing. That's the thing. Is like, you have an arm like that. Just remember 2 years ago, they were talking about trading him for a top 50 prospect and get a bat in return. They
Mm.
stood pat. They stood pat. And now you're looking at a situation possibly where you have Edward Cabrera and Trevor Rogers, who was the NL Rookie of the Year runner up, and they're going to go to a different team for nothing or pennies on the dollar. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Marlins do in handling their rotation, not just for the end of 24, but
Yeah.
into 25, because
Yeah.
we all know they're not going to be starting 30 games on this team next
No.
year.
I personally, I think they like Trevor more. It's
I
just like
agree.
my sense. Like, Skip Schumacher drops like he drops a few breadcrumbs in terms of his insight, his knowledge. Like he does drop some insights along the way. Like the whole Sixto Sanchez thing with Skip Schumacher, like it was
Oh, he can't
very
stand him.
clearly right. Like it was a clear, like it was premeditated in the way that he went about that, and
Mm-hmm.
he's never done that before. There's similar breadcrumbs that have been dropped, not as obvious and blatant, but linked to Eddie Cabrera, and I think there's a similar issue, maybe a different issue, but like a similar feeling around that. Like, you can sense that Skip is not fully bought in on Eddie. You can sense, I mean, the Marlins are trying to move him to the Pirates in the offseason, right? Like there was a deal that was close, it seems. So, I think I just don't see Eddie Cabrera as a fit. And like I said, like if we kind of take away the names and we take away the history and the prospect status, which kind of does bias us a touch, you go and watch Eddie Cabrera start and you watch any one of the Munoz starts, and listen, you're picking Roderick Munoz at this point. The reason you persevere with Eddie Cabrera is because, well, he was a prospect and we loved him and Stanley
Mm-hmm.
2.0, but frankly, we just haven't seen any of that from Eddie Cabrera for so long. As always, it's the hope that kills you, and we keep dreaming on these guys. It's like me with Brinson for years, obviously. You just keep dreaming on these guys. But at some point, you just have to acknowledge what it is. Maybe Eddie Cabrera goes to another organization and turns it around, lights it up. Maybe Sixto does. Gut feel is if you can't make it work with Skip Schumacher and the Marlins organization, there's a strong chance it's not going to work anywhere, and it's probably going to get worse. So I think they keep Trevor. I think they like Trevor more. I think they move Luzardo, Sixto, Eddie. By the time we get to next year, Max Meyer will be given more of an opportunity. Yuri will be back. Sandy's back. Like, that's your core. There'll be injuries. There always is. And then waiting in the wings is like, let's see how they develop Noble Meyer, Thomas White. Like, let's see what that looks like. For me, I think there's a chance they could be tasting big league action in 26. So, as always, there's things to be excited about with the rotation. It feels like it needs a bit of a shakeup, though, right? It feels like it's time to move on from a few guys. But the point, going back to it earlier, is Bendix needs to find a way to translate those guys that aren't going to help in 24, 25, or even maybe 26. Find guys, offensive guys that can help you in the future. And when the window reopens again, however soon that may be, it's these trades now that kickstarted that on the offensive side. So that's the riddle he's got to solve. It's a tough one, but that's what he's paid for, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's something for us fans to remind ourselves that nobody is immune from criticism. Obviously, when I had Joe Frisaro on the show just last week, he lit into the front office.
Yeah.
He lit into them, and that's deserved. Like, you get paid the big bucks. You are put in this position. You have to have accountability, and you have to have results. And that
Yeah.
goes for the front office and on the field. Like you mentioned, Lewis Brinson had all the tools in the world, was a top prospect, I believe top 20 prospect at the time.
Yeah.
The Yelich deal was, oh, what a return. The Brewers gave up so many prospects, but they were prospects. And ultimately, production is what matters. And you had guys highly touted coming into the draft, like Jacob Berry, like JJ Bleday, that never fully developed and put forth the production warranted to stay in a Marlins uniform. So Bendix will be judged on what he produces, and every
No
year
doubt.
matters. Every year matters. The rest of this year matters. And as we wrap this episode up, Peter, as we head into the summer of 2024, and surely it's going to be a lot more losses, but what is one thing that you are hopeful for that would really lift up your spirits, whether it's a trade, whether it's a promotion? I know you've talked about Griffin Conine joining the show, but what is the one thing that you'd like to hold your hat on as we head into the summer?
Yeah, that is a great question. For me, listen, I'm a fan, but I'm also a podcaster, as you know. And I think what I'm excited. Thank you, mate. I appreciate that. And I think what I'm excited about, honestly, is what the next 6 weeks is going to bring. Because, going back to it, like, this 6 week period now is super critical to 2026. Like, 25 is a bust. Like, there's a fan base that's kind of thinking, hey, we may like invest in some free agents. Guys, what are you smoking? It's not happening. 26 is the earliest possible window. So this next 6 weeks really impacts that. So I'm super intrigued to see, because Peter Bendix has already got a Yelich on the record. You move Luis Arias in the first month of the season, that's your first major data point, right? Or your data point, depending on your geographic location. That's your first point for Bendix. That's when you start to analyze how good is Peter Bendix at what he does. You start to analyze the Luis Arias trade. That's your starting point. You then come back to, well, what did he turn the best reliever in baseball, one of the best relievers in baseball, Tanner Scott? What did he become? That's the question I'm looking forward to seeing. What do they do with Luzardo? That's a great point. That back injury, the velo's down. Do they protect Luzardo? For me, I spoke about it on yesterday's show. Like, for me, if Luzardo's dealing with a back issue and his velo's down 5 miles an hour, the duty of care is you shut him down at this point, because the season's cooked anyway. So I'm very interested to see whether the Marlins play it that way, because I know they want to sell him. Do they do 100%. The right thing? Do they do the right thing by Luzardo? Or do they do the right thing, what they're looking for, trying to extract value? But really, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for Luzardo, where all of a sudden now he's maybe got a back issue to go with another issue earlier this year? I don't know. For me, I feel like got to shut it down. Can they get anything for Bell? Like, can Bendix do anything for Bell? I think they can, to be honest with you. And then it comes down to Jazz is hot. He's one of the best outfielders, center fielders in the game right now. Is now the time to move Jazz Chisholm Jr.? Do you cash in on the health, the production right now? And there's teams that need it. The Phillies, I think, are crying out for a center fielder. The Dodgers have got an issue in center field. There's tons of clubs out there that look around and go, Jazz would be a great fit on the field. The really interesting question about Jazz is he going to be a great fit off the field, considering, like, could you imagine Jazz going to the Dodgers now?
Miggy Rowe.
And Miguel Rowe. I mean, it would be absolutely hilarious, to be honest with you. But, this for me, it's not, there are things I'm excited about. I'm excited about, like, a Griffin Conine debut, and that will come, at some point in August. Victor Mesa Jr., I'm excited about. I've not been a Troy Johnston guy, but, he'll get a look. Like, we're going to get a look at some of the young guys. And to your point, we get excited about young guys. We can start to hope. And so you can build off that hope. Right now, the offense, there is no real hope there. And so you need to kind of move. We need to see what Bendix can do. And then it's about, you start looking actually to the future, fully to the future. And we'll start to see some guys. So it's going to be fun. In many ways, as a content creator, as a podcaster, I know it's going to be busy. I know there's going to be a lot of emergency pods. I know you're going to feel it too. It's going to be fun to cover. It's going to be a lot of discourse. Frankly, most of the trades we're probably going to look at, and we're going to go, the Marlins have been fleeced on paper. I can already see it happening. Man, is that all we got for Tanner Scott? Is that all we got for Jazz? But as you've already mentioned, we've seen it before. these deals like a Yelich where you go slam dunk win for the Marlins, right? Fat bust. Other deals, you
Mhm.
go, oh man, Yimi Garcia, Brian De La Cruz. Who the hell's Brian De La Cruz? Next thing is, turns out to be an absolute stunner of a deal. So you never know. And that's the point is for Bendix, he's just got to nail it. He's got to absolutely nail this deadline because this deadline is so critical to the timeline and to really executing on what he's committing to the Marlins, which is sustained success. That starts now. And it's all about what you can do in this period. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out.
I am too. I am too. I mean, we're looking at a deadline possibly, and this is the last thing before we close that I'll say is that Peter Bendix's tenure in Miami most likely will be defined by this deadline. And I'm certain of it because you look at the
Yep, me
direction
too.
this team is going, you look at the trade assets they have, Luzardo, who you didn't trade in the offseason for Joey Ortiz with the Orioles, who, man, I'd love that one. But
Mm-hmm.
you passed on that, couldn't pull the trigger. Now what do you do at the deadline? Do you hold on to him? What will this deadline, what will your statement be? Are you going to make a move and trade Jazz in a blockbuster? You have one of the top closers in the game. You have one of the top lefties in the game with years of control. And you have a transcendent star who can play center field, play the infield. Here we go, Bendix. The cards are in your hand. Let's
Yeah.
see what you got. Well, Peter, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's always an honor to talk baseball with you and talk some Marlins.
Same to you, buddy. Appreciate it. That was fun. I mean,
It
let's
was.
let's do it again. Let's make sure we do it near the deadline or just after May. Let's, like
I
you
like
said,
it.
it's the slide indoors moment for Peter Bendix. Really, is like this deadline, and I think we're in lockstep. That it's huge. It's absolutely huge. This deadline. So we can break it down as best we can. But it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of discourse. I'm very interested to see how they play it, considering the type of trade they made with Arias, how early the timing was just like, unseen in some ways. And so we should
Yeah.
expect the unexpected maybe with Peter Bendix. So we'll wait and see. But appreciate you having me on, Jeremiah. It was a lot of fun. And let's do this again soon.
Oh, we will for sure. And with that, let's go fish.